My FIL keeps correcting how I parent my own kids, and my wife won't back me up. I found the recordings on a Sunday morning while looking for batteries in Lisa's nightstand. 3 voice memos, time-stamped over the past 6 weeks. The first one started mid-sentence. And you need to document every instance, every time he raises his voice, every meal he feeds them, every bedtime he misses. We need a pattern, sweetheart. Judge Kowalski responds well to patterns. My father-in-law's voice, talking to my wife. About me. About building a custody case against me. For my own children. I stood there holding a pack of AA batteries, listening to my marriage disintegrate through a smartphone speaker. And the weirdest part was how calm I felt. Like I'd been waiting for this shoe to drop for 2 years and was almost relieved to finally hear it hit the floor. We'd been married for 7 years when Richard moved from Connecticut to live 3 blocks away from us. Lisa sold it as temporary, just until her dad got settled after her mom's death, but I knew better even then. Richard Beaumont didn't do anything temporarily. The man planned his grocery trips with military precision, labeled his garage tools with a label maker that probably cost more than my first car, and had opinions about everything from the correct way to load a dishwasher to the proper pronunciation of pecan. When Lisa suggested he look at houses in our neighborhood, I'd smiled and nodded like a good husband, but something in my gut had clenched. Our kids were 5 and 3 at the time. Mia had just started kindergarten. Oliver was still in that chaotic toddler phase where every meal ended with food in places food had no business being. The first correction came during a family dinner at our house, maybe 3 weeks after Richard moved in. Oliver had refused to eat his broccoli, and I'd told him that was fine. He could have more carrots instead. Richard's fork paused halfway to his mouth. That's not how you handle selective eating, David. You're creating a permissive environment. The child needs to understand that dinner is dinner, not a buffet. Lisa had laughed, this nervous little sound I'd never heard before, and said something about how her dad had raised her with firm boundaries. I'd looked at her, waiting for her to tell him we had our own parenting style, but she just refilled his water glass. That night in bed, when I brought it up, she'd sighed. He's just trying to help, David. He raised me, didn't he? And I turned out fine. That became the script. Richard would make a comment about Mia's bedtime being too late, or Oliver's tantrums being the result of insufficient structure, or my decision to let them play in the rain being reckless. And Lisa would find a way to validate him. Dad has a point. Maybe we should consider his perspective. He's just worried about the kids. I started keeping my mouth shut during family dinners, letting Richard's lectures about child development and behavioral psychology wash over me like background noise. He'd taught high school for 30 years before retiring, and he wielded that experience like a badge of authority. Never mind that I'd been these kids' father since birth. Never mind that Lisa and I had made every parenting decision together for years before he showed up. The escalation was gradual enough that I didn't see it as escalation. Richard started dropping by unannounced, usually around dinner time. He'd walk in without knocking because family doesn't need to knock, and he'd survey our evening routine with this expression somewhere between concern and disappointment. If I was letting the kids watch cartoons while I cooked, he'd suggest that screen time before dinner affected their ability to digest properly. If I was playing rough with Oliver on the living room floor, he'd mention something about overstimulation and cortisol levels. Lisa would be right there, nodding along, sometimes even taking notes on her phone. Actual notes, about how to parent our children. Then Richard started showing up when Lisa wasn't home. I'd be doing bath time or homework or any of the 1,000 small tasks that fill an evening with young kids, and I'd hear his key in the lock. He had a key. Lisa had given him a key 4 months after he moved to town, and when I'd objected, she'd looked at me like I was being unreasonable. What if there's an emergency? What if the kids need him? The first few times he used it, I'd been too surprised to react. He'd just appear in the hallway, smile at the kids, and start questioning my decisions. Why was I letting Mia stay up past 8 on a school night? Didn't I know that consistent sleep schedules were fundamental to academic performance? Why was I giving Oliver apple juice instead of water? Was I aware of the sugar content? I started documenting it in my own way, sending texts to Lisa at work. Your dad just showed up again, 3rd time this week. Can you please talk to him about calling before he comes over? He spent 20 minutes explaining to Mia why the bedtime story I chose was developmentally inappropriate. Her responses got shorter and shorter. He's just trying to help. Don't be so sensitive. My dad knows what he's doing. That last one gutted me. Not, we know what we're doing. My dad. Like I wasn't even part of the equation anymore. The first time I lost my temper was over a peanut butter sandwich. Oliver had requested one for lunch, and I'd made it, cut diagonally the way he liked. Richard had walked in mid-preparation and actually took the sandwich out of my hand. Not like this. You're creating choking hazards with these large pieces. Here. He'd proceeded to cut Oliver's sandwich into tiny squares, explaining the Heimlich maneuver statistics for children under 5, while my son stared at his mutilated lunch with tears welling up. I'd said, and I remember this exactly because I replayed it in my head about 1,000 times afterward. Richard, please get out of my kitchen. Not yelling. Firm, clear. Setting a boundary like every parenting book on the planet recommends. He'd looked at me with this expression of practiced patience, like I was one of his difficult students, and said, Someone needs to put these children's safety first. Lisa came home to Oliver crying, me standing at the sink gripping the counter, and Richard explaining how I'd become aggressive when he'd tried to prevent a choking incident. I'd waited for her to ask my side. She didn't. She'd hugged Oliver, smoothed his hair, and suggested I take a walk to cool down. Cool down. Like I was the problem. Like her father hadn't just implied I was an unfit parent in my own home. I'd walked for 2 hours that night, circling our neighborhood until the streetlights came on, and when I came back, Richard was reading bedtime stories to both kids in Mia's room. Lisa was sitting on the bed with them, all cozy, like this was perfectly normal. The corrections started happening in front of the kids. Richard would countermand my instructions directly. I'd tell Mia to put on her jacket for school, and he'd say, "Actually, sweetie, you should wear the heavier coat. Your father doesn't check the weather." I'd tell Oliver he could have 10 more minutes of playtime before bath, and Richard would check his watch and say, "Bath time is at 7, not 7:10. Consistency, Oliver. Remember what Grandpa taught you about consistency?" The kids started looking to him for confirmation before they'd listen to me. Started calling out, "Is that okay, Grandpa?" when I gave them instructions. I mentioned it to Lisa, several times. She said I was imagining things, being paranoid. Her father was just engaged with his grandchildren. Then Richard started keeping a notebook. I saw it one evening when he'd left his jacket on our couch. A small leather-bound book, the expensive kind with the built-in bookmark ribbon. I opened it. The first page was dated 6 months earlier, right after he'd gotten his key. Every page was filled with observations about my parenting, written in his precise teacher's handwriting. October 14th. David allowed Mia to skip vegetables at dinner, substituting with crackers. Dietary inconsistency noted. October 23rd. Raised voice at Oliver during tantrum. Child appeared frightened. Emotional regulation concerns. November 3rd. Left children unsupervised in bath for approximately 4 minutes while answering phone. Safety protocol violation. My hands started shaking before I finished the first page. This wasn't a concerned grandfather's notes. This was evidence. Documented, dated, detailed evidence being compiled against me. I took photos of every page with my phone, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. There were 30 pages. 30 pages of my failures as a father, real and imagined, twisted and catalogued and preserved. The last entry was from 3 days earlier. David continues to resist guidance. Lisa agrees documentation is necessary for potential custody proceedings. Attorney consultation scheduled for next month. I confronted Lisa that night after the kids were asleep. Showed her the photos on my phone. Demanded to know what the hell was going on. She'd gone pale, then red, then this weird blotchy combination of both. "You went through my father's things?" That was her response. Not denial, not explanation. Accusation. I'd violated her father's privacy. I pointed out that he was documenting evidence to take my children away from me, and she'd started crying. Not the sad crying, the angry kind. She said I was blowing things out of proportion. Her father was just worried about the kids. Yes, they'd talk to a lawyer, but only to explore options if my behavior continued to deteriorate. My behavior. Like I was the one who'd moved in uninvited and started dismantling someone else's family. I asked what behavior she was talking about. She'd pulled up a list on her phone, an actual typed list. "You're inconsistent with discipline. You allow too much screen time. You don't enforce nutritional guidelines. You prioritize being their friend over being their parent. You get defensive when anyone offers constructive criticism." Each item delivered in this flat, rehearsed voice. I recognized Richard's phrasing in every sentence. She wasn't even using her own words anymore. I asked when she'd stopped trusting me with our own children. She said she'd never stopped trusting me, but that didn't mean I couldn't improve. Her father had experience. Her father had training. Her father knew what he was doing. And then, the real kicker. Maybe if you spent less time being jealous and more time listening, we wouldn't be having these problems. I slept on the couch that night. Couldn't remember the last time we'd had a fight that ended with me physically leaving the bedroom, but I knew if I stayed, I'd say things I couldn't unsay. Around 3 a.m, I heard Lisa's phone buzz in the bedroom, then her voice, low and urgent. I crept to the door. "Dad, he found your notebook. I don't know, he photographed it or something. No, he's upset, but I can handle it. Yes, I know. We'll talk tomorrow." The casual conspiracy of it hit me harder than the notebook itself. They had regular calls, regular updates. This wasn't a concerned grandfather overstepping boundaries. This was a coordinated campaign. The attorney consultation Lisa mentioned wasn't for next month. It was scheduled for the following Thursday. I found the confirmation email when I borrowed her laptop to print Oliver's school permission slip. She'd met with a family lawyer named Gregory Foster 3 times already. The email chain included attachments, Richard's notebook scanned and converted to PDF, photos of our house that I didn't remember being taken, and a document titled Parental Fitness Concerns, David Rourke. I printed everything, sat at the kitchen table at 5:30 a.m, reading through my wife's legal strategy to remove me from my children's lives. The document listed incidents I didn't even remember. Times I'd supposedly yelled, times I'd supposedly neglected supervision, times I'd supposedly made decisions that put the children at risk. Half of it was exaggerated. A quarter was taken completely out of context. The rest was just fiction. I called in sick to work and drove to a law office on the other side of town. I'd found Denise Kimura's name through an online search for family law attorneys with high ratings in custody cases. She could see me that afternoon. I brought printed copies of everything: the notebook photos, the emails, the parental fitness document. I told her the whole story in her office while she took notes, her expression getting progressively more serious. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Mr. Rourke, what you're describing is parental alienation. It's a form of emotional abuse where one parent systematically undermines the other parent's relationship with the children. The fact that it's being orchestrated by your father-in-law with your wife's cooperation makes it more complicated, but it's still actionable. Actionable." That word felt like oxygen. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. This was real. It had a name, and there were legal remedies. Denise explained that I needed more evidence. Documentation of Richard's interference, the children's changing behavior toward me, any communications that showed coordination between Lisa and Richard. She recommended I install security cameras in common areas of the house to document Richard's uninvited entries and his interactions with the kids. She also recommended I start recording my interactions with Lisa when discussing parenting matters. Connecticut was a one-party consent state for recording. I just needed to be part of the conversation. That's how I ended up with 3 cameras in my own house, recording my own family. One in the living room, one in the kitchen, one in the hallway. I told Lisa I was installing them for security after there'd been break-ins in the neighborhood. She'd barely looked up from her phone. Richard came over the next day and spent 20 minutes examining them, asking technical questions about the storage system and whether they recorded continuously. I'd smiled and explained the features while internally screaming. I wanted him to perform. I wanted him documented. I needed Lisa to see what I was seeing. The recordings were worse than I'd imagined. Richard came over 18 times in 2 weeks. 18. Lisa was home for maybe 6 of those visits. He had a routine. He'd let himself in, call out for the kids, and start his inspection. Checking the fridge for appropriate food choices, looking at the kids' homework, commenting on the state of their bedrooms, and constantly correcting. That's not how your father should have explained that math problem. Your father let you watch TV before homework again, didn't he? Come here. Let Grandpa show you the right way to tie your shoes. The kids' faces on the recordings broke my heart. They'd started looking nervous when I gave them instructions, glancing toward the door like they were waiting for Richard to arrive and override me. Denise reviewed the footage during our second meeting. She'd watched about 30 minutes before she paused the video and looked at me with something close to anger. "This man is in your home without permission how many hours per week?" I'd done the math. Approximately 15 hours. When I wasn't home, when Lisa was at work. Just Richard and my kids, rebuilding their understanding of who was in charge. Denise made notes, asked about Lisa's work schedule, asked whether Richard had any formal custody arrangement or legal guardianship. He didn't. He was just Grandpa. Grandpa with a key and a mission. The crisis point came on a Wednesday night. I'd planned a father-daughter date with Mia. Just us, dinner at her favorite pizza place, maybe mini-golf after. She'd been excited about it all week. I came home from work at 5:30 to pick her up, and she was gone. Both kids were gone. Lisa's car was in the driveway. The house was empty. I called Lisa. No answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I was starting to genuinely panic when Richard's car pulled into the driveway. Both kids climbed out, chattering happily. Richard followed them, carrying shopping bags. "We went to the Science Museum," Mia announced. "Grandpa said Wednesdays are educational activity days now." I looked at Richard. He looked back at me with this small, satisfied smile. "Lisa mentioned you and Mia had plans, but I thought the museum would be more enriching than pizza and video games. The children need structured learning experiences, not empty calories and screen time." He deliberately intercepted my time with my daughter, deliberately undermined plans we'd made together, and from the way Mia was describing the exhibits, completely oblivious to the fact that anything was wrong, he'd positioned himself as the hero of the afternoon. I didn't yell. I wanted to. I wanted to scream at him to get out of my house, away from my kids, out of my life. Instead, I smiled at Mia and Oliver and told them to go wash up for dinner. When they were upstairs, I turned to Richard and kept my voice level. "You need to leave, now, and you need to give me your key." He'd laughed. Actually laughed. "I don't think so, David. These children need a stable adult presence in their lives, and clearly that's not coming from you. Lisa agrees. You're welcome to take this up with her when she gets home from her father's house." Her father's house. Lisa had been at Richard's house while he was here with our kids. They'd coordinated this, planned it. He'd known exactly when to arrive, exactly what to say, exactly how to twist the knife. I took out my phone and called Denise right there in front of him, asked if I could legally demand his key back. She said yes. I could ask for it, but I couldn't forcibly take it. I could, however, change the locks. Richard's smug expression faltered when he realized I was actually talking to an attorney. I told him again to give me the key. He placed it on the counter, still smiling, and said, "You're making a mistake. The court will see this as your inability to accept help, your refusal to put the children's needs first." I changed the locks that night. All of them. Lisa came home at 8, tried her key, and started pounding on the door. I let her in. She was screaming before she even crossed the threshold. How dare I lock her father out? How dare I change the locks without consulting her? This was her house, too. I let her vent. When she finally ran out of steam, I pulled out my laptop and showed her the security footage. 2 hours of Richard's visits, condensed into a highlight reel that Denise had helped me edit. Richard letting himself in. Richard contradicting me to the kids. Richard going through our mail, our cabinets, our private spaces. Lisa watched in silence. When it ended, she was crying. "He's just trying to help," she whispered. But it sounded hollow even to her. I told her about the attorney I'd hired, about the parental alienation case I was prepared to file, about the custody evaluation I was going to request. I told her she had a choice: marriage counseling, boundaries with Richard, and a unified front as parents. Or I'd file for divorce and fight for primary custody with the evidence I'd compiled. I hated giving her an ultimatum, hated that it had come to this. But I was done being erased in my own home. She'd stared at me like she'd never seen me before. "You'd really take the kids from me?" I'd looked right back at her. "You and your father were planning to take them from me. I'm just defending myself." She called Richard right there, on speaker, told him he couldn't come over anymore without an invitation, that he needed to respect our boundaries, that she'd made a mistake letting things go this far. He'd argued, insisted she was making an emotional decision, reminded her about everything he'd documented, everything the attorney had said about my fitness as a parent. Lisa had taken a breath and said something I'll never forget. "Dad, I married David because I wanted a partner, not a father. I already have one of those, and I'm worried I've been letting you be his parent instead of letting him be my husband." Richard showed up the next morning anyway, rang the doorbell at 7 a.m., demanding to be let in. I opened the door but kept the security chain on. He had papers in his hand, court papers. He'd filed for grandparental visitation rights, claiming that I was preventing him from having a relationship with his grandchildren. The petition included references to my unstable behavior and concerning parenting choices. It included statements from Lisa, dated 3 weeks earlier, supporting his petition. Lisa appeared behind me in her bathrobe, saw the papers, and went white. "Dad, I never signed anything." He'd smiled. "You did, sweetheart. 3 weeks ago. You'd just forgotten, that's all." Denise filed an emergency motion opposing the grandparental visitation and submitted a counterpetition outlining the parental alienation. She included the security footage, the notebook photos, the emails, everything. The filing was 83 pages. I know because I read every single page 3 times, sitting in my car in the parking garage at work, making sure every detail was accurate, every timestamp, every quote, every piece of evidence that showed this wasn't a concerned grandfather, but a calculated campaign. Denise had organized it chronologically, showing the escalation pattern. Month 1, minor corrections. Month 3, documented observations. Month 6, legal consultation. Month 8, coordination with Lisa to build a custody case. Month 9, attempted abduction from school. The pattern was undeniable when laid out like that. Clinical, systematic, predatory. The hearing was scheduled for 10 days later. In the meantime, we had a temporary order that Richard could only see the kids in a neutral location, supervised by a third party. He violated it within 48 hours, showed up at Mia's school during pickup, tried to take her to get ice cream. The school called me, called Lisa, called the police. Officer Raymond Chen arrived to find Richard arguing with the principal, insisting he had rights as a grandfather, that this was a misunderstanding. The police report became part of our evidence. Richard's attorney tried to frame it as an innocent mistake, but the school had security footage showing Richard attempting to physically take Mia's hand and lead her to his car when she'd said she needed to wait for mommy or daddy. Mia had started crying. The footage showed that, showed her trying to pull away. Showed Richard leaning down and saying something to her that made her go still and compliant. We'd never know what he said. She wouldn't talk about it. Just kept saying Grandpa wasn't bad. Grandpa loved her. She didn't want to get Grandpa in trouble. The custody evaluator was Dr. Patricia Nowak, a clinical psychologist with 23 years of experience in family court cases. She interviewed each of us separately, interviewed the kids, reviewed all the documentation from both sides. She spent 3 hours at our house, observing how I interacted with Mia and Oliver, how Lisa interacted with them, how we functioned as a family. She asked the kids questions about their daily routines, who helped with homework, who made their meals, who put them to bed. Oliver, bless his heart, told her that Daddy made the best pancakes, but Grandpa said sugar for breakfast was bad, and now Mommy didn't let Daddy make pancakes anymore. But Dr. Nowak did something I didn't expect. She asked both kids to draw pictures of their family during the last session. Mia drew me, Lisa, Oliver, and herself. Then she added Richard off to the side, bigger than everyone else, with lines coming from him to each of us, like a spider web. Dr. Nowak asked what the lines were. Mia said, "That's Grandpa making sure everyone does things right." Oliver drew a similar picture but put Richard in the middle with all of us around him. When Dr. Nowak asked who was in charge in his family, he'd pointed to Richard without hesitation. I watched through the one-way glass in the observation room and felt something crack inside my chest. My 5-year-old son didn't think I was in charge of my own family. Dr. Nowak spent an additional session with just the kids, using play therapy techniques. She had them act out bedtime routines with dolls. Mia had the father doll start to read a story. Then the grandfather doll came in and said the father doll picked the wrong book. Oliver had the grandfather doll correct the father doll about bath time temperature, dinner vegetables, and proper jacket selection for cold weather. The kids weren't even aware they were revealing anything. This was just normal to them. This was what family looked like in their minds. Dr. Nowak's notes from that session, which I read later as part of the final report, used words like enmeshed, hierarchical confusion, and parentification of the grandfather role. Dr. Nowak's report was 37 pages long. I read it in Denise's office, Lisa sitting across from me, both of us silent, except for the occasional sound of turning pages. The conclusion was stark. Richard Beaumont has engaged in a systematic campaign to undermine David Rourke's parental authority and relationship with his children. While his stated motivation appears to be concern for the children's welfare, his methods constitute emotional manipulation and boundary violations that are harmful to the children's sense of security and stability. Lisa Rourke's cooperation with her father's interference, while possibly well-intentioned, represents a fundamental betrayal of the marital partnership and has created confusion and anxiety in both children regarding parental hierarchy. Recommendation: family therapy for all parties, strict boundaries on grandparental contact, and continued monitoring of the parental dynamic. The court hearing was brief. Richard's attorney tried to paint him as a concerned grandfather being shut out by a vindictive son-in-law. Denise submitted the security footage, the notebook, the emails, Dr. Nowak's report, the police report from the school incident, and a statement from Mia's teacher describing how Mia had started questioning her father's instructions in class and asking if someone needed to check if Daddy was right. The judge was a woman named Judith Kowalski, the same one Richard had mentioned in that first voice recording I'd found. She'd read everything, watched the security footage, and when Richard's attorney finished his presentation, Judge Kowalski had looked directly at Richard and said, "Mr. Beaumont, your behavior toward your son-in-law and grandchildren crosses the line from concern into control. The petition for grandparental visitation is denied." But there was a moment before the ruling that I'll never forget. Richard's attorney had called Lisa to the stand, trying to establish that she supported her father's involvement. Lisa had walked up there looking pale and exhausted. The attorney asked if she believed her father had her children's best interests at heart. Lisa looked at Richard, looked at me, looked down at her hands. Then she said, "I thought he did, but now I realize he had his own interests at heart. He wanted to be right, more than he wanted us to be happy, and I enabled that because I was too afraid to disappoint him." Richard's face had gone red. His attorney tried to recover, asking if she felt her husband was a fit parent. Lisa's voice was steady when she answered, "My husband is an excellent father. I forgot that for a while. I'm not going to forget it again." The judge had nodded, made some notes, and then delivered her ruling. But she didn't stop there. She issued a restraining order. Richard was prohibited from coming within 500 feet of our home, the children's schools, or any location where the children were present. He could have supervised visitation twice a month at a family services center, pending completion of a parenting boundaries course and therapy. If he violated the order, he'd face contempt charges. Richard had sat there, face red, jaw clenched, while the judge outlined the restrictions. When she finished, he'd stood and walked out without a word to any of us. Lisa sobbed in the parking lot, not because of the outcome, because her father had refused to look at her on his way out, refused to acknowledge her existence when she'd tried to speak to him. He'd disowned her right there in family court because she'd chosen her marriage over his control. I held her while she cried, and I felt this complicated mix of vindication and grief. I'd won. We'd won. But the cost was her relationship with her father, and watching her process that loss was brutal. The therapy was hard. Dr. Jerome Whitfield, our family counselor, didn't let either of us off easy. He made Lisa confront how she'd prioritized her father's approval over her husband's dignity, made her trace the pattern back to childhood, to always seeking Richard's validation, to never questioning his authority. She'd been conditioned to trust his judgment over her own, and when he'd turned that judgment toward me, she'd defaulted to the familiar pattern of obedience. Dr. Whitfield made me confront my own role too, how I'd let resentment build instead of setting hard boundaries earlier, how I'd documented and gathered evidence but hadn't actually fought for my marriage until I was ready to end it. During one particularly brutal session, Dr. Whitfield had asked Lisa to describe what she thought love looked like when she was growing up. She'd talked about her father's high standards, his constant feedback on her grades and activities, the way he'd review her college applications and correct her essays. He cared so much, she'd said. He was always involved, always making sure I did things right. Dr. Whitfield had paused and asked, "Did you feel loved, or did you feel monitored?" Lisa had broken down. She'd spent 3 decades thinking surveillance was love, that control was care, that having someone document your every move meant they were invested in your success. When Richard had started doing the same thing to me and our kids, she'd recognized it as love, because that's what love had always looked like in her family. Dr. Whitfield assigned us homework. Lisa had to write down every decision we'd made as parents in the past month and identify which ones were truly ours versus which ones had been influenced by Richard's voice in her head. The list was devastating. Bedtime routines, meal choices, discipline strategies, weekend activities, more than 60% had Richard's fingerprints on them. She'd brought the list to our next session and said, "I don't even know who I am as a mother without my father's script." That's when the real work began, helping Lisa develop her own parenting voice, her own confidence, her own ability to trust herself. It took months. Sometimes it still takes effort, but she's getting there. The kids' therapy was somehow worse. Watching Mia tell her child psychologist that she'd thought Daddy and Grandpa were supposed to be in charge together, that she didn't understand why they didn't agree, that she was worried she'd done something wrong by listening to Grandpa. Watching Oliver demonstrate how Grandpa had taught him to check with an adult before doing what Daddy said. The therapist, Dr. Angela Reeves, explained that both children had developed anxiety around parental authority and would need time to rebuild their sense of security with me. She recommended I do special one-on-one activities with each kid, no interruptions, no Richard, just rebuilding trust. Dr. Reeves used something called attachment-based play therapy with both kids. During one session, she had Oliver play a game where a toy bear had to choose between listening to the Papa Bear or the Grandpa Bear. Oliver had frozen, unable to make the toy choose. He'd started crying and said he didn't want anyone to be mad at him. He was 5 years old and already carrying the weight of divided loyalties like it was his responsibility to manage adult relationships. Dr. Reeves explained to me afterward that children in alienation situations often develop what she called loyalty binds, impossible situations where choosing one parent or authority figure feels like betraying another. Oliver had internalized the message that making me happy meant making Grandpa sad, and vice versa. Mia's sessions revealed something even more disturbing. She'd been keeping a secret notebook of her own, hidden in her school backpack. Pages of rules Richard had taught her about helping Daddy be better. Things like, if Daddy forgets to check homework, tell Grandpa. If Daddy lets you have treats before dinner, remember to tell Grandpa. If Daddy seems tired or frustrated, that's important information for Grandpa to know. She'd been turned into a spy in her own home, and she'd thought she was being helpful. Thought she was protecting us by reporting to Richard. Dr. Reeves had to explain to her, very gently, that children aren't supposed to report on their parents. That she'd been given a job that wasn't hers to do. Mia had cried and asked if Grandpa had tricked her. I'd wanted to say yes, wanted to tell her exactly what Richard had done. But Dr. Reeves advised me to let Mia come to her own conclusions in therapy, rather than inserting my anger into her healing process. I took Mia to pizza and mini-golf on a Saturday afternoon, 6 weeks after the court hearing. Just us. She'd been quiet in the car, picking at her seatbelt. Halfway through the pizza, she'd asked if Grandpa was mad at her. I'd put down my slice and looked at her. Grandpa made some bad choices, baby. Grown-up choices that hurt people. But none of that is your fault. You're a kid. You're supposed to trust the adults in your life, and Grandpa took advantage of that. I'm not mad at you. Mommy's not mad at you. We love you so much. She'd nodded, eyes shiny with tears, and then asked if we could still do mini-golf. We did. I let her win. Richard tried to contact the kids through social media, created a fake account, and sent Mia friend requests through a kids' educational app she used for school. The app flagged it as suspicious, notified me, and I reported it to our attorney. Another violation. Another court appearance. This time, Judge Kowalski wasn't patient. She extended the restraining order to include all forms of electronic communication and required Richard to wear a GPS monitor to ensure compliance with the distance restrictions. His attorney argued it was excessive. The judge said violating a court order to contact minor children through deceptive means was exactly the kind of behavior that warranted monitoring. Lisa filed for divorce from her father. Not a legal divorce, obviously, but she wrote him a letter, had Denise review it to make sure it didn't violate the restraining order, and sent it certified mail. She told him she loved him, but she couldn't have him in her life if he couldn't respect her marriage and her children's well-being. She told him he'd raised her to value family above everything, but then taught her to destroy her own family to maintain his control. She told him that maybe someday, if he got help and genuinely changed, they could rebuild a relationship. But for now, she needed to protect her kids from learning that love looked like manipulation. She never got a response. But 3 months later, his attorney contacted Denise to inform her that Richard had enrolled in a year-long therapeutic program specializing in family dynamics and control issues. He'd also moved back to Connecticut, sold his house in our neighborhood and left. The attorney said Richard wanted Lisa to know he was working on himself, but would respect her need for space. Lisa cried when I told her. She was proud of him for getting help and devastated that it had taken losing everything to get him there. It's been 18 months now. The kids are doing better. Mia doesn't ask permission to trust me anymore. Oliver asks for my pancakes every Sunday and doesn't mention whether they're good for him or not. Lisa and I are better too. Not perfect. We're still in therapy, still working on communication, still navigating the scar tissue from those years when she chose her father's voice over mine. But we're choosing each other now. Actively. Intentionally. I kept one copy of Richard's notebook. The original, not the photos. Denise gave it back after the case closed. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe as a reminder that people you trust can systematically dismantle your life while smiling and claiming they love you. Maybe as proof that I wasn't crazy. Maybe just because getting rid of it felt like pretending it never happened. And it did happen. It shaped us, nearly destroyed us, but ultimately made us stronger in this weird, painful way that trauma sometimes does. Last month, Mia asked if Grandpa would ever come to her birthday parties again. I told her I didn't know. That Grandpa was working on being healthier, but even if he got better, things would be different now. She'd thought about it, and then said, "That's okay. We're different now, too." She's 8 years old, and already understands that some relationships don't survive the damage. I hate that she learned that so young, but I'm grateful she learned it before she started thinking control was the same thing as love. The security cameras are still up. Probably don't need them anymore, but they've become part of the house. Sometimes I review footage from the early days, just to remind myself that I'm not exaggerating, that it really was that bad. Lisa caught me watching it once and asked why I torture myself. I told her it's not torture. It's evidence that we survived, that we chose each other when it would have been easier to fracture. That family isn't about bloodlines or duty or maintaining peace at the cost of dignity. It's about building something together and defending it when someone tries to tear it down, even if that someone claims they're helping. Richard sends a card on the kids' birthdays now, never violates the distance restrictions, never tries to contact them directly, just sends a card through his attorney to our attorney to me and Lisa. The last one, for Mia's birthday, included a note. "I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong. Love, Grandpa." Lisa wanted to let Mia read it. I said we should wait, maybe in a few years, when she's old enough to process it without blaming herself. Lisa agreed. Sometimes I wonder if I overreacted, if I should have tried harder to resolve it without lawyers and courts and restraining orders. Then I remember that voice memo I found that Sunday morning, talking about building a custody case, documenting my failures, pursuing legal action to remove me from my children's lives. I remember Mia's face on the security footage when Richard was leading her to his car at school, that mixture of confusion and obedience that looked way too much like fear. And I know I didn't overreact. I protected my family, from someone who claimed to be family. I tell the kids I love them every single day now, multiple times. I tell them they're safe. I tell them they can trust me. I tell them the rules in our house, the boundaries we set, the structure we create. It all comes from me and Mom together. No one else gets a vote, not Grandpa, not teachers, not friends' parents, just me and Mom. That's the deal. They nod like they understand, and maybe they do. Maybe they understand it better than most kids because they've seen what happens when that deal gets broken. Lisa still talks to her therapist about the guilt, about how she let her father infiltrate our marriage and poison it from the inside, about how she trusted his judgment over mine because that's what she'd been taught to do since childhood. Dr. Whitfield tells her guilt is useful only if it drives change, not if it drives shame. She's changing. We both are. Building new patterns, learning to check in with each other instead of assuming, learning to present a unified front even when we disagree privately, learning that marriage is a choice you make every day, not a static state you achieve and then coast through. I don't know if Richard will ever actually change. Don't know if his therapy program is genuine growth or just another performance, another attempt to control the narrative. Part of me hopes he does change, for Lisa's sake, for the kids' sake. They deserve to have a grandfather who loves them without needing to control them. But another part of me knows that even if he does change, things will never be what they were. You can't unknow someone's capacity for manipulation. Can't unfeel the fear of having your children turned against you. Can't forget what it's like to be erased in your own home. What I do know is that I'm not afraid anymore. Not of Richard. Not of losing my kids. Not of standing up and fighting for my family when someone tries to take it from me. I know what I'm willing to do to protect them. Know what lines I'll draw and defend. Know that being a good father doesn't mean being perfect or never making mistakes. It means showing up, being consistent, choosing your kids over comfort, over approval, over the path of least resistance. Mia starts 4th grade next month. Oliver starts 1st. They're good kids, happy kids, secure kids. They know Mom and Dad are a team. They know the rules are the rules because we decided them together. They know that love doesn't come with conditions or surveillance or documentation. Just presence, just consistency, just showing up every day and being the person they need you to be, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I think about that moment I found the recordings. How calm I felt. How prepared. Like I'd been waiting for confirmation of something I already knew. I think about all the small moments before that, the corrections and contradictions and quiet erasures, and I wonder how I let it go on so long. Then I remember that love makes you patient, makes you accommodating, makes you doubt yourself when you should be trusting your instincts. Richard weaponized that, used my love for Lisa and my desire to keep the peace against me. The lesson I'm teaching my kids now, the one I wish I'd learned earlier. Love without respect is just control wearing a mask. Real love builds you up, trusts you, gives you space to make mistakes and learn from them. Doesn't document your failures for future use. Doesn't undermine you to the people who matter most. Real love is messy and imperfect and sometimes uncomfortable, but it's never manipulative, never calculating, never conditional on your obedience. I got my family back. Not the family we had before Richard moved here. That family is gone, and honestly, it probably wasn't as solid as I thought it was if it could be infiltrated so thoroughly. We're a different family now, smaller in some ways, without Richard's presence, stronger in others, forged in the kind of crisis that either destroys you or teaches you what you're made of. We chose the second option. Barely. But we did. And on the days when I doubt that choice, when I wonder if I pushed too hard or asked too much or damaged things beyond repair, I watch my kids playing in the backyard, watch them argue over whose turn it is on the swing, watch them team up against me in board games, watch them be kids, secure and loved and free from the weight of adult manipulation. And I know I did the right thing, the hard thing, the necessary thing. That's what being a father means, making the hard calls, standing in the gap, fighting battles your kids don't even know need fighting, so they can just be kids, so they can trust the adults in their lives without calculation, so they can grow up knowing what healthy love looks like because they lived it, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Richard tried to take that from them, from me, from all of us. He failed, and if he ever tries again, we'll be ready. Because we know now what we're defending. Not just a household or a routine or a parenting style, but the fundamental right of parents to raise their children without interference. The fundamental right of kids to have their family structure respected and protected. The fundamental right to say no to control disguised as concern. Those are rights worth fighting for, rights worth going to court for, rights worth changing locks and installing cameras and hiring attorneys for, rights worth defending with everything you have. Because without them, you're not really a family. You're just people sharing a space, waiting for someone else to tell you how to live. We're done waiting, done accepting, done accommodating. We're a family now, our way, our rules, our love, and nobody gets to tell us otherwise. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.